She had exactly 8 words. Not a speech. Not a confession. Not the carefully rehearsed declaration she had been quietly composing in her head for the better part of 5 months. Just 8 words, delivered across a kitchen counter on a Wednesday evening with the casual, unbothered energy of someone announcing a change in the weather. She folded the hand towel first. That detail matters. Because Mary Cole was the kind of woman who folded the hand towel, even when her heart was hammering so loudly she could feel it in her back teeth. She had learned that particular discipline in her grandmother's kitchen in Southwest Atlanta, where Grandma Ruth had taught her that the most powerful thing a black woman could ever possess in any room, in any city, in any country on earth, was the appearance of absolute calm. They will always be watching you for the crack, baby. Don't give it to them for free. Mary had carried that instruction across 3 time zones, through 2 demanding kitchen positions in Chicago, through the brutal hierarchy of Atlanta's finest dining rooms, and now, apparently, 42 floors above the sprawling neon-lit chaos of Seoul, South Korea. She aligned the edges of the towel. She smoothed the fabric flat against the dark quartz counter. She set it down precisely. And then she said it. I have a date tonight. I won't be back early. Now, you need to understand something about the man standing on the other side of that kitchen island, before we go any further. Kwon Jun was not a man who lost composure. He had built an entire empire on the foundation of never losing composure. He had sat across tables from people who wanted him dead, and ordered his food with the same relaxed authority he used to sign contracts. He had walked out of rooms that were actively on fire, metaphorically and on at least 2 occasions literally, without once breaking his stride. He did not flinch. He did not panic. He did not reveal. Until right now. What happened to his face in the 3 seconds after Mary's words landed was not anger. It was not the cold, controlled recalibration she had watched him deploy on men who came to the apartment with bad news, and left looking like they had remembered something extremely important. This was something quieter. Something she had never seen on him before. The face of a man who has just realized that a clock has been running the entire time, and he forgot to set it. He didn't speak for 10 full seconds. Mary counted every single one of them. Then, low and absolute, scraped from somewhere beneath his usual register, he said 2 words. Cancel it. And that is where we begin. But to understand what Mary said next, to understand why those 2 words landed on June like a detonation, and what she had been quietly, brilliantly, patiently building toward for 5 months without him ever seeing it coming, you need to go back to the beginning. You need to go back to the day she first arrived. Mary Cole stepped out of the private elevator on the 41st floor of one of Seoul's most exclusive residential towers carrying 2 leather duffel bags, a roll of custom Japanese knives wrapped in linen, and the particular brand of composure that belongs exclusively to people who learned very young that showing your hand before you understand the room is a luxury you cannot afford. She was 26 years old. She was 5 feet 5 inches. She had the kind of face that people underestimated in professional settings and regretted later. Open and warm and quietly recording everything. She had grown up in her grandmother's kitchen in Southwest Atlanta. The real Southwest Atlanta, not the gentrified edges but the deep interior where everybody's grandmother knew everybody else's grandmother, and the smell of something slow cooking on a Sunday morning was as reliable as sunrise. She had stood on a wooden step stool to reach the stovetop and learned something that no culinary school in the country ever formally teaches. That food is a conversation. Every dish is a sentence. Every meal is something you are trying to say to someone who may or may not be ready to hear it. Grandma Ruth had pressed this into her with the same patient repetition she used for everything that mattered. Baby, when words fail people they eat. So you better learn how to speak through what you cook, because someday somebody is going to need you to say something that language just cannot hold. Mary had carried that lesson through culinary school, through Chicago, through Atlanta, and now into a building in Seoul where the elevator required a biometric scan, and the lobby security had looked at her with the particular species of surprise she had learned to absorb without acknowledgement somewhere around age 19. She had taken this posting for 3 concrete reasons. The compensation was significant enough to eliminate her remaining culinary debt in a single year. The kitchen specifications the agency had forwarded read like a professional fantasy, and the placement agent had described the client as private, but professional in a tone that communicated something considerably more specific. Do your job. Keep your eyes open. Don't ask questions you don't need answered. Mary had kept all three instructions firmly in mind as she crossed the threshold. The woman waiting for her was Oh Soo-yeon. Madame Oh was constructed entirely of precision. Silver-streaked hair pulled back with architectural severity. The posture of someone who had organized the lives of powerful people for decades and had developed a complete immunity to being impressed. She looked at Mary with the assessing neutrality of a woman who had watched a long rotation of people come through this door and had quietly kept count of how long each one lasted. She guided Mary through the apartment at a pace that suggested she had given this tour many times and had made peace with the fact that not everyone absorbed it correctly on the first pass. The apartment itself was a masterclass in restrained wealth. No art chosen to impress. No furniture selected for conversation. Everything in it existed because it needed to and for no other reason. There was no performance here. No audience being played to. That told Mary something significant about the man who owned it before she had ever laid eyes on him. People who have genuinely built something from the ground up don't need to wave it at you. They simply live inside it. Madame O stopped in the center of the kitchen and delivered her briefing with the crisp efficiency of someone who had said these words many times and meant all of them. Mr. Kwon does not take breakfast before 7. Morning tea at 6:50 precisely. His preferences are consistent and non-negotiable. He does not offer verbal feedback on meals. If the plate is finished, the meal was satisfactory. If it is not finished, adjust accordingly. The study door when closed remains closed. You do not knock. You do not inquire. You simply ensure the evening meal is ready by 7:30. Mary asked whether he had specific dietary restrictions or aversions. Madame O considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. Mr. Kwon has never in 4 years of my employment described anything as delicious. He has also never described anything as inadequate. He eats or he doesn't. That is the entirety of his review process. She paused. He finishes the plate. That is enough. Mary absorbed this without blinking. Then she turned her attention to the kitchen. It stopped her completely. Not in a way she allowed anyone to see. She was a professional, and professionals do not stand in doorways with their mouths open. But internally, for approximately 4 seconds, every trained instinct she possessed went silent. 6-burner professional induction range. An integrated blast chiller. Dry aging cabinets built directly into the custom millwork. Copper and stainless arranged with the kind of precision that comes from someone who deeply understands the logic of a working kitchen, even if they have never personally stood behind one. Countertops of dark seamless quartzite that absorbed the recessed light without glare. It was a workspace designed for someone who took food seriously as a craft, and yet every surface was untouched. Every tool was in its designated place, waiting. This kitchen had been built for someone else. With real care. With the specific understanding of what that person would need. Mary ran her finger along the edge of the prep counter. Opened 3 drawers in sequence. Checked the organization logic of the spice cabinet. Stood in front of the knife block for a long moment reading the arrangement, not by size but by frequency of use, the logic of a person who understood that the tools you reach for most should always be closest to hand. By the end of that first morning she understood 2 things simultaneously. The kitchen was extraordinary, and whoever had designed it knew exactly who was going to stand in it. That evening at 7:30 the apartment shifted. Mary didn't see him enter. She felt the change in the room's atmosphere the way you feel a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. A quality of attention entered the space that hadn't been there a moment before. Something that made the air slightly denser, slightly more charged. She finished plating the first course. A clean, precise sea bream crudo with an Asian pear and white soy broth finished with cold-pressed perilla oil, and carried it to the dining room. Kwon Jun sat at the head of the long dark oak table. He was wearing a charcoal suit with the tie removed, his collar open at the throat, revealing the faint dark edge of a tattoo tracing the line of his collarbone. His face was severe geometry. High cheekbones, a sharp jawline, dark eyes that registered her entry with the immediate comprehensive efficiency of someone who categorized everything they encountered before deciding what to do with it. He looked at her once. Completely. The way a camera takes a photograph. Then he returned his attention to the tablet propped against the table's centerpiece. Mary set the plate down and introduced the dish in 3 clean sentences. June said her name as acknowledgement. Miss Cole. That was the entirety of their exchange. He ate slowly. He read his documents. He did not speak again. When he stood 20 minutes later and disappeared into his study, Mary walked out to retrieve the service. The plate was immaculate. Not a drop of broth remaining. She stood at the sink and thought about what Madame Mo had told her. He finishes the plate. That is enough. She decided it was a reasonable beginning. What she had not fully prepared herself for was the way the weeks that followed would rearrange her understanding of what enough actually meant. Over the following 2 months, Mary discovered that June noticed everything. Not in the performative way of people who want you to know they're observant. In the quiet, comprehensive way of someone whose survival had depended for years on reading a room faster than everyone else in it, and who had never once switched that faculty off. Even when he was ostensibly home for the evening with nothing to read at all. He noticed the Tuesday afternoon she swapped galangal for the standard ginger in his braised short rib. He didn't say a word. He simply lifted his eyes from his phone the moment the first bite hit his palate, and looked toward the kitchen doorway with the measured expression of a man filing a new data point under the correct heading. He noticed the Friday evening she shifted the geometric arrangement of the seasonal side dishes from size-based to color-temperature logic. He stood at the edge of the dining table for 5 full seconds before sitting down. 5 seconds longer than he had any practical reason to stand there. He noticed the Saturday she came back from Mangwon Market with persimmons instead of the Asian pears she usually bought. When he walked past the bowl on the counter, he paused, looked at it, continued walking, said nothing, but registered everything. Mary noticed him noticing. She noticed it and filed it carefully and told herself it was simply the professional habit of a man whose entire operation depended on catching what other people missed. She told herself this with decreasing conviction as the weeks passed. Because the truly significant development was not what June noticed. It was where he chose to spend his time. By the 6th week, the man who ran a multi-million-dollar operation from behind the closed door of his West Wing study had developed a habit of finding extraordinarily mundane reasons to be in Mary's kitchen during the hours she was working. He would emerge at 9 in the evening holding an empty glass. He would walk past the fully stocked wet bar in the lounge without stopping. He would cross the apartment, pour himself a glass of roasted barley tea at the kitchen counter, and then simply remain there, leaning against the cool quartz edge of the island, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Han River glittering 42 floors below, occupying the space with the complete undemanding stillness of someone who had simply decided this was where he needed to be. Mary would work around him, adjusting heat levels, skimming broths, tasting and correcting and reducing with the focused attention of someone who understood that a kitchen in motion is a living thing that requires your full presence. She would also, on the evenings when her grandmother's voice was loudest in her memory and the distance between Seoul and Southwest Atlanta felt most like a physical weight, put music on the small speaker above the refrigerator. Not the ambient playlist she used when she wanted the kitchen to feel neutral. Her music. The Atlanta R&B that had been the background score of every Saturday morning in Grandma Ruth's kitchen, every Sunday dinner, every birthday and holiday and ordinary Tuesday that had been made extraordinary simply by the sound of it filling a room. She did this the first time without thinking. She reached for the speaker out of habit, the muscle memory of comfort, and pressed play before she had registered the implication of doing it in someone else's home. June walked past the kitchen doorway on his way to his study 20 minutes later and paused. Not long enough to make it an event. Just long enough for the pause itself to be a sentence. Mary felt it without seeing it. She kept her hands moving and her back straight, and thought about what her grandmother would say about a man who paused in a doorway to listen to something that wasn't meant for him but reached him anyway. She knew exactly what Grandma Ruth would say. "Baby, that man is hungry and it's not for food." Mary had chopped the rest of the vegetables with perhaps more force than strictly necessary. The evening the mandolin slipped was the first time the fiction between them cracked open wide enough to let something through. She had been shaving radishes paper thin, her concentration fractionally elsewhere, when the blade caught the side of her index finger. Not a serious wound. But it stung immediately and bled with the enthusiastic urgency that finger cuts always produce. She clamped her free hand over it. Turned the tap to cold. Before she had located a paper towel, a shadow crossed her peripheral vision. June was standing directly beside her. She had not heard him cross the kitchen. He was simply there, the warmth of him registering before she had fully processed his presence. Without asking permission, he took her wrist, gently but with the precise clinical grip of someone who had treated injuries before under considerably more urgent circumstances, and drew her hand away from the water to examine the cut. He said nothing. He opened a drawer she hadn't realized contained medical supplies, and extracted a first aid kit. He treated the cut with the careful, unhurried attention of someone who had decided this particular task deserved his full concentration. Antiseptic. Pressure. A clean waterproof bandage applied with exact, even tension. When it was done, he held her hand for 1 beat longer than the clinical process required. Then he released her. Set the kit on the counter. Met her eyes for a single unguarded second. Careful, he said. Barely above a whisper. He turned and walked back toward his study. Mary stood at that sink for a full minute after he left. Not moving. Just standing there holding her own hand where his had been a moment before. Listening to the sound of her own breathing, and the refrigerator cycling, and the distant traffic 42 floors below. She was a black woman from southwest Atlanta working in the home of a Korean crime lord in Seoul, South Korea, navigating a situation that had no handbook and no precedent in anything she had ever encountered. And she admitted to herself in the privacy of that kitchen, in serious trouble. She put the radishes back on the board and kept working. What she did not do, and this required genuine discipline, was examine too closely the thing that had begun to grow in the sealed room she had built for it in the back of her mind. She knew its shape. She knew its weight. She knew that in a different context, in a different arrangement of circumstances, she would have simply walked up to this man and told him the truth. But this was not a different context. He employed her. He sponsored her visa. She lived inside his home. Any move she made from inside those constraints would be permanently shadowed by the question of whether she had felt free to make it. And that question mattered to her. It mattered deeply. So she cooked. She brought everything she had to the food she set in front of him, and let the language of it speak for her, and trusted that a man who noticed everything would eventually notice that too. On the evenings she identified by the specific weight of the silence he carried through the front door, the heavier pressurized kind that told her the day had required more of him than most days. She made soup. Doenjang jjigae, slow and deeply savory. Or a clean anchovy broth with hand-torn noodles. Something warm and uncomplicated that asked nothing of the person eating it except to sit down and be present. He never mentioned the soup. He finished every drop of it every single time. By the 4th month, Mary had a word for what was happening between them. She had sealed it in a box and placed the box on the highest shelf available. But she visited it every morning when she started the barley tea, and every evening when she heard his footsteps cross the marble toward the kitchen. And the box was getting heavier and the shelf was getting lower, and something was going to have to give. She just needed to figure out how to make that something be him. On a Tuesday morning in the 5th month, Mary Cole burned his rice on purpose. Not catastrophically. Not obviously. Not in a way that announced itself as anything other than possibly a minor miscalculation from a kitchen that had otherwise produced 5 months of flawless execution. She left the heavy cast iron pot on the heat exactly 3 minutes past the point of perfection. Long enough for the bottom layer to cross the precise golden threshold between cooked rice and nurungji. That deeply toasted nutty caramelized crust that forms when heat and patience and intention intersect exactly right. She hit it perfectly on the first attempt because she was very good at her job. She set the bowl on the counter and stepped back. June arrived at 7:15, freshly showered, dark hair falling loose across his forehead. He sat at the island, picked up his spoon, scooped a portion of the rice into his morning broth. Mary stood with her back to him polishing an apple she had no intention of eating, watching his reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. He chewed. Stopped. His eyes narrowed fractionally as the smoky toasted register hit his palate. He looked at the bowl. Then with the slow deliberateness of a man who had already completed his analysis, and moved on to his conclusions, he turned his head, and looked at the back of Mary's head. He asked whether the induction unit was malfunctioning. Mary turned around with an expression of complete serene innocence. No, Mr. Kwan. The equipment is functioning perfectly. Sometimes a little extra heat is exactly what's needed to bring out the depth that playing it safe won't give you. She held his gaze. He held hers. For 4 seconds the kitchen contained nothing but the two of them, and the precise charged weight of what had just been said without being said at all. Then June looked back at his bowl. He finished every last caramelized grain, and said nothing more. The stalemate might have continued indefinitely. June was a man of exceptional patience, and Mary was a woman of exceptional determination, and left to their own devices they might have orbited each other for the remaining 7 months of her contract until her visa expired. And she packed her knives and her grandmother's recipes and her still unopened box of feelings, and flew home to Atlanta. What broke it was Shin Dongchan. Dongchan was June's oldest friend, and the only human being in his professional orbit who treated him with the cheerful, unintimidated familiarity of a man who had known him before the empire existed. He was good-looking in an open, expressive way that was the precise opposite of June's controlled severity. He found human beings endlessly entertaining, and had never once felt the need to conceal this. He arrived one Thursday afternoon, and said everything he needed to say in the hallway before he ever reached the kitchen. Mary listened from the pantry, without adjusting her position or her expression. He had asked June whether he found her company agreeable. June had said she was an employee. As though those 4 words resolved anything at all. Dongchan's verdict was delivered with the quiet certainty of a man who had been watching this particular situation develop for weeks. He was going to watch this woman leave, Dongchan said, and spend the next 20 years of his life thinking about it. And unless someone said something, that was exactly what was going to happen. Then Dongchan appeared in the kitchen doorway with the energy of someone who had found his preferred destination. He looked around the kitchen with genuine appreciation. He told her June discussed her cooking during executive meetings. He told her with the mild conspiratorial warmth of a man providing intelligence rather than gossip that he had asked June directly whether he found her interesting, and June had said she was an employee, as though that was a complete sentence. He said he wasn't inserting himself. He was providing context. There was a distinction. He left. Mary stood still for 12 seconds. Then she reached for her phone and texted Kim Jae-ho. I need your brain for something. Saturday morning. Coffee. Kim Jae-ho was 22 years old, born in Daegu, and currently in the final grueling stretch of a debut pipeline that had been delayed twice and was now fixed on an immovable timeline. He had the specific emotional intelligence of someone who had spent his entire adolescence studying what made human beings respond, first from talent competition stages, and then from entertainment label rehearsal rooms where the entire science of making an audience feel something was broken down into its component parts and rebuilt from scratch. He also, as Mary had discovered over 4 months of riverside coffees and post-workout conversations, listened the way very few people actually listen. Without preparing his response while she was still speaking, he heard everything she gave him that Saturday. The first aid kit, the soup, the barley tea and the standing at the island and the music in the doorway, the scorched rice and the silence that followed. When she finished, he looked at the ceiling for a moment. He's in love with you, he said. Mary said he couldn't possibly know that. He said a man who controls an entire operation does not stand in someone's kitchen every evening watching them reduce stock, because he enjoys the ambient humidity. He said June had diagnosed himself and refused to treat it, and the justification was probably something to do with protecting her professional autonomy, and it was a completely reasonable justification that was slowly suffocating him. So you don't wait, he said. You give him a reason to stop deciding. 3 moves. Something that arrives in his space that he cannot directly respond to. Something visible on you that someone else chose. Then the date. He leaned forward. A man who controls everything will not hold still once there is a timeline running that he didn't set. Phase 1 was 12 yellow tulips. Jae-ho ordered them anonymously, delivered to the penthouse on a Monday afternoon, with a single cardstock tag bearing one handwritten initial. G. He chose yellow tulips because Mary had mentioned them exactly once, in passing, as the flower Grandma Ruth had kept on the kitchen table every Sunday without exception. Yellow tulips because they meant something. Yellow tulips because when June saw them he would know, even without knowing anything specific, that someone had been listening to her with the kind of attention that remembers what matters. June arrived home that evening to a kitchen smelling of slow-cooked depth and soy and sesame, and to a vase of yellow flowers that had never sat on that counter in the entire time the apartment had existed. He stopped in the entrance. Mary kept her back to him. Kept working. "Flowers," he said. "Not a question." "From a friend," she said, ladling without turning. The silence that came back was different from his usual silences. Lower. Denser. Something that sat in the room and occupied it. He said he wasn't aware she had made friends here. She said 4 months was enough time. She said Kim Jae-ho. From the neighborhood. She said it the way you state a verifiable fact. Flat. Unhurried. No performance. She expected a question or the sound of him retreating. What she got was neither. She plated the meal and carried it out and turned back to clean the counter. And June was still standing at the kitchen entrance. Not looking at her. Looking at the tulips. His expression was the one she had learned to read from her peripheral vision. The one that appeared when something had entered his calculation that changed the shape of the equation. He stood there another moment. Then he walked to his study without a word. Without a good night. Just the quiet, deliberate close of his door at the far end of the hall. Mary stood at the stove. The satisfaction she had planned for was entirely gone. Replaced by something considerably less comfortable. That, she realized, had not gone the way she rehearsed it. Phase 2 came 10 days later in the winding stone alleyways of Buckshin-Hannock Village. Jae-ho found them at a small artisan stall near the northern end. Hand-forged silver drop earrings, small hammered discs with a faint dark patina that made them look chosen rather than purchased. Deliberately imperfect in the way that only deliberate things are. These, Jae-ho said simply. Mary started to object. He was already paying. He told her he wanted her grandmother's sweet potato pie when this worked. That was the entire fee. He told her to put them in now because visibility mattered and her boss needed to see something on her that someone else had chosen. She put them in at the stall. Tilted her head. Caught the way the silver caught the low slanting autumn light. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're my best friend in this city," he said. "Sort it out." She returned to the penthouse at dusk. June was in the lounge, not the study, seated in his reading chair with an actual book open in his hands. Reading glasses she had not known he owned were pushed up on his forehead. He looked younger like this. Less constructed. He looked up when she came in. She was moving toward her room. She didn't change her path. "New earrings," he said from across the open living space, without her having done a single thing to draw attention to them. She stopped. Turned. She said Jae-ho had found them in Buckshin that morning, and that they had spent the afternoon together. June set the book down. The reading glasses came off his forehead, and were placed on the side table with more deliberation than the action required. He said they had spent the afternoon together. She said they were friends, and it was what friends did on their days off. He looked at her from across the room with the complete, undeflected attention she had always found difficult to hold. Not cold. Not warm. Simply entirely present. As though she were the only variable in the space worth the full allocation of what he had. "They suit you," he said. Quiet. Measured. Then he picked up the book. Put the glasses back on. Returned to the page. Mary stood at the hallway entrance a moment longer than she needed to. Then she walked to her room, and sat on the edge of her bed, and looked at the light moving across the hammered silver, and thought about the fact that she had engineered that exact reaction with careful, deliberate precision, and had absolutely no idea what to do with how it actually felt to receive it. She sat with that for a long time. Outside, Seoul did what Seoul always did. It kept going, enormous and indifferent, lit in every direction, completely unbothered by the specific interior weather of one woman sitting on the edge of a bed in a high-rise apartment trying to remember which one of them had started this. Phase 3 arrived in a craft envelope left outside the service entrance on a Thursday morning while June was in a meeting. Jae-ho had texted nothing in advance, except check the door. Inside was a rare out-of-print first edition of a Southern culinary heritage collection, focused on Black American food history. A book Mary had spent 2 years hunting for, mentioning it only once in passing during a post-workout cool-down as a footnote to a different thought. Jae-ho had tracked it down through an Itaewon importer who specialized in English-language rarities, and had it sent overnight. Inside the front cover in his handwriting. For the best cook in Seoul, and the most patient one. Stop feeding the silence and say the thing. Sort it out. Ji. Mary read it twice in the hallway. Then she carried it inside and set it open on the kitchen prep counter. And went about her morning without examining too carefully why she positioned it at exactly the height Jun's eyes would reach when he crossed the kitchen threshold. He found it that evening. He picked it up with the careful attention he gave unfamiliar objects. Turned it over. Read the spine. Open the front cover. A long quiet beat followed. He read the inscription aloud. Level. Careful. Like a man taking the precise measure of each word before moving to the next. Stop feeding the silence and say the thing. Sort it out. Then he asked what it meant. Directly. Not a rhetorical question. A man who wanted an actual answer. Mary dried her hands. She said it meant Jae-ho was encouraging, and that it was nothing heavy. Jun said Jae-ho had sourced a book she had spent 2 years looking for, inscribed it, and sent it to her door, and that was not nothing. He closed it. Set it on the counter with more deliberation than the action required. Then he looked at her. Not the professional distance she had learned to navigate. Something quieter and off balance. The look of a man hearing a language he almost knows and finding it increasingly impossible to pretend he doesn't. He asked what she had told Jae-ho about him. She said nothing he would object to. He said that was not a specific answer. She said it was the one she had. She picked up the book, tucked it under her arm, and walked toward the hallway. Good night, Mr. Kwon. She made it all the way to her room before she exhaled. The following Saturday, a woman arrived at the penthouse at 3 in the afternoon. Her name was Yoon Chae-rim. She came with a bottle of Burgundy and the absolute certainty of someone who has never once in her adult life needed to ask permission to enter any room. She was the daughter of a maritime shipping magnate whose business interests were deeply intertwined with Jun's operations, and she was beautiful in the specific cultivated way that comes from decades of knowing it, and organizing every detail of one's presentation accordingly. There were long-standing expectations in certain circles. Mary gathered from the quality of Madame O's carefully neutral briefing that she and Jun represented a natural conclusion to two families whose trajectories had been parallel for years. Whatever those expectations were, they appeared to be entirely one-directional. Chae-rim found her way to the kitchen while Jun finished a call. She leaned against the doorframe and looked at Mary the way certain women look at things they are currently deciding what to do about. You're the American hire, she said. Not unkind. Precise. Evaluating. Mary said her name was Mary Cole, and asked if she could get her anything. Chae-rim requested sparkling water with a thin lime, and came further into the kitchen without being invited. Her eyes made a slow comprehensive circuit of the space before landing on the silver earrings catching the kitchen light. She tilted her head slightly. Said they were lovely. Very artisanal. The question underneath sat unasked. Mary smiled at her. Polite and entirely impenetrable. She said they were a gift from a friend. Chae-rim looked at her for a moment. Something recalibrated. Then she straightened, smoothed her coat, and moved toward the door. At the frame she paused. Turned back. When she spoke it wasn't a threat. It was considerably more unsettling than a threat. He commits to things, she said, long past the point where other people would let go. I just thought you should know that. She left. Mary set down what she was holding and walked directly to the balcony. 42 floors of open air between her and the street. Seoul spreading in every direction. Lit and enormous and completely indifferent to the specific knot of feeling taking up residence in her chest. She stood there and breathed and thought about what Chae-rim had actually said, and whether it was a warning or an observation, and what the difference between those two things was in this particular context. She was still thinking about it when Jun appeared behind her. He came to stand beside her with a foot of space between them and rested his forearms on the cold metal rail. Mary said Chae-rim had visited. He said he knew. The way he said it, not explaining, not apologizing, simply acknowledging it with the specific weight of someone who had been carrying more awareness of this conversation than its surface suggested, made her turn to look at him. She said Chae-rim was beautiful. He said she was stating that as though it was information he should act on. She asked if it wasn't. He asked for whom. The wind moved between them. The city hummed 42 floors below. She said Chiram had looked at her like she was in the way. Something moved through his eyes. Fussed. Almost imperceptible. The muscle in his jaw tightened. Did she? He said. Mary said he didn't look surprised. He held her gaze for a beat that stretched past its natural end. Then he said, "Come inside." It was getting cold. She said she was fine. He said her name. Not a command and not a request. Something that lived in the narrow space between those two things. A register she had no professional language for. "Come inside," he said again. She followed him. Not because he had asked. Because there was something underneath the restraint in his voice that was running out of room. And she wanted to keep listening until she could name what it was. What happened next is the part of the story that Mary did not see coming. Because she had been running an operation, carefully and patiently and with the full deployment of her intelligence, and she had been so focused on executing it correctly that she had not once considered the possibility that she was not the only one running one. She found out the following Wednesday morning. She was at the kitchen counter prepping stocks when her phone buzzed with a message from Jae-ho. "Quick question," he wrote. "Did June seem specifically agitated the Saturday that woman Chiram visited? Like more than the tulips agitated?" Mary thought about it. She wrote back yes. Different kind of agitated. Like something had confirmed rather than surprised him. Jae-ho didn't respond for 4 minutes. Then, "Interesting. Because Chiram called me last night." Mary set down the ladle. She typed slowly. "Why would Chiram call you?" Because apparently Jae-ho wrote, June contacted her 2 weeks before her visit and asked her to come to the apartment and behave in a way that would make you uncomfortable. He wanted to see how you'd respond to territorial pressure from someone in his world. Mary read this twice. Then she read it a third time. She stood very still in the kitchen for a long moment. Outside, Seoul went about its business 42 floors below, entirely unconcerned. She typed, "He staged her." Jae-ho typed back immediately. "He staged her." And Chiram, for what it's worth, told me she improvised the part about commitment because she said, and I'm quoting directly, "The American girl clearly had real feelings and June was being an idiot." Mary set the phone face down on the counter. She stood there for 60 full seconds. Then she picked it up and typed to Jae-ho. "So while I was running a jealousy operation in his kitchen, he was running a pressure test on you at the same time," Jae-ho finished. "Neither of you knew about the other's operation." "Neither of us knew," Mary confirmed. A pause. Then Jae-ho wrote, "Mary, this man is not going to confess on his own. He has now confirmed to himself that you have real feelings, and he still hasn't said a word. You need to end this. Thursday. The date. Do it exactly as planned." She looked at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back, "Book it." And so we are back where we started. The quiet kitchen. The refrigerator cycling. Seoul traffic distant and muffled. A hand towel folded with the precision of a woman who had learned from her grandmother that calm is the most powerful thing you can choose to show. "I have a date tonight. I won't be back early." June stood 2 feet from her now. He had crossed the invisible boundary of the kitchen island. The line he had maintained for 5 months with the discipline of a man who understood exactly why he had drawn it. The air between them was charged in a way that had nothing to do with the induction range. "Cancel it," he said. Low. Pulled extremely tight beneath the surface. Mary crossed her arms and held his gaze without flinching. She asked him to give her one reason why she should. He said because he didn't want her to go. He said that was a reason. She said it wasn't enough of one. He moved. And Mary remembered, not for the first time, the amount of space Kwon Jun occupied when he was moving with actual purpose. He crossed the remaining distance and stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head to hold his gaze. And this time he did not look away. He said she had been in this apartment for 5 months. He stopped. Started again. He said he had been trying to do the correct thing. He said he understood what the lines were, and that he had put them there himself. Mary said evenly that he had been maintaining appropriate professional distance. He said yes. She said while standing in her kitchen every single evening for no practical reason. Something moved through his expression. She said while crossing 30 feet of apartment to bring her a first aid kit she didn't ask for. While noticing the exact second she changed a single ingredient. While finishing soup he had never once acknowledged she was making specifically for him. She held his gaze. "June," she said. What exactly were those lines protecting? The composure that had held in every difficult room he had ever occupied left him completely. What replaced it was something she had never seen on him before. Unguarded. Genuinely off-center. The expression of a man who has just understood that the walls he constructed went all the way to the ceiling, and that he built them so well he nearly sealed himself inside them permanently. He said finally, quietly, that he hadn't wanted to put her in a position. He said she was on a contract he controlled. He said he sponsored her visa, and that he hadn't wanted her to feel like she had no choice. Something released in Mary's chest. She said yes. She said she knew exactly why he had pulled back. She said she was standing here right now with nothing between them, and this conversation telling him that she wanted him to say what he actually wanted. A breath. He said simply, and without performance, that he didn't want her to go on a date with anyone else. He said he wanted to take her to dinner. He said he wanted to know what music she grew up on, and what she wanted when the contract ended, and what her mornings looked like when she had nowhere to be. He said he had wanted to say this for months, and had been very deliberately not saying it. Mary looked at him for a long quiet moment. She said she knew. He said she knew. She said his name. She told him she had burned his rice on purpose 2 months ago to see if he would say anything. She had changed the seasoning on the soup 4 times just to watch his face. She had worn the earrings at eye level on a Thursday evening specifically because she wanted to see his reaction. She said the tulips were ordered by her. The book was Jaeho's idea, executed on her instruction. The phone calls were timed. She paused. She said Jaeho was 22 years old and 10 months from his debut, and had zero romantic interest in her, or she in him. She said he had helped her because she liked June and June wasn't saying anything, and she needed to know whether he ever was going to. The kitchen was absolutely still. June looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, unmistakably, the corner of his mouth moved. The expression she had caught once in profile 7 weeks ago, and had been thinking about considerably more than she had admitted to anyone, including herself. He said she had burned his rice. She said on purpose. He said he had gotten the nutty depth and known immediately it was intentional. She said with the smile finally breaking through that he had gotten exactly what he was paying for. He moved forward, slow and certain, closing the last of the distance between them until she had to lift her head to hold his gaze. His hand came up and touched the edge of one earring where the silver disc caught the kitchen light. He said quietly, with every layer of the professional distance entirely gone, that she could have just told him. She said she had tried the direct approach in month 2 and he had gone and made barley tea. A breath of genuine, unguarded laughter moved through him. She had never heard that sound from him before. It was warm and slightly surprised and completely unperformed, and she decided immediately that it was her new favorite sound in the world. He said he owed her an apology. He said 5 months was too long to have one conversation. She said he had been being careful. He said he had been being a coward, and that there was a difference and that he knew the difference. She looked at him. Yes, she said. There is. Then she said there was something else. He waited. She said she knew about Chiram. The quality of his stillness changed. She said she knew he had staged the visit. She said she knew he had been running his own operation at the same time she was running hers, and that neither of them had known about the others until 3 days ago. She watched his face move through several things in quick succession before settling on something that looked, unmistakably, like the specific embarrassment of a man who has just been caught being considerably more human than his reputation suggests. He said after a moment that Chiram improvised. Mary said she knew. She said Chiram had called Jaeho. He absorbed this. He said Chiram had always had her own agenda. Mary said it had worked out for everyone involved. He looked at her. Really looked at her. The full weight of it with nothing held back. So while you were trying to make me jealous, he said slowly. I was trying to see if you'd fight for what you wanted, she said. And while I was testing whether you had real feelings, he said. You were busy proving it without knowing you were being tested, she said. A long pause. He said they had both been running operations in the same kitchen at the same time without knowing it. She said apparently so. He said he didn't know whether to be impressed or alarmed. She said in her experience those two things were frequently the same thing. The corner of his mouth moved again. This time it made it all the way. She pulled out her phone and typed to Jae-ho that something had come up and she was sorry about the short notice, and she would explain everything. 3 seconds later her screen lit up. Finally. I have been aging in real time watching you too. You owe me that pie and also my emotional processing time. She turned the screen toward Jun. He read it. Something moved across his face that she hadn't catalogued before. A warmth with nowhere left to hide. He said he wanted to meet Jae-ho. She said Jae-ho wanted premium beef for his emotional distress. Jun said that was fair. Then he reached out and straightened one of the earrings where it had shifted during the conversation. The same careful, unhurried attention he brought to everything he had decided mattered. And let his hand rest against her face instead. And this time there was no study door to retreat to. No barley tea to pour. No professional distance to maintain, and no operations left to run. Just this. The kitchen and the city below and 2 people who had been speaking the same language for 5 months, and had finally stopped pretending they didn't understand each other. Sunday morning. The barley tea was already steeping when Jun appeared in the kitchen doorway at 8:15 in his dark robe. Hair loose, wearing the expression of a man who had stopped pretending he didn't know exactly where he needed to be. He came to the island. His place. The spot he had claimed over 5 months of standing there for reasons he had never once stated aloud, and didn't need to state now. Mary slid a bowl across the dark quartz toward him. Rice. Every grain exact. Nothing scorched. He looked at the bowl. Then at her. This is correct, he said. A quiet, genuine warmth underneath it. She poured her coffee. She said she had always known how he liked it. He picked up his chopsticks and ate in the comfortable, unhurried silence of 2 people who no longer needed to perform anything for each other. Then without looking up from the bowl he said that the next time she wanted his attention, she did not have to burn anything. Mary looked at him. At the sharp profile she could have drawn from memory by the end of month 2. At the completely unguarded expression he was no longer working to conceal. She smiled into her coffee. Where's the fun in that, she said. He looked at her then. Fully. And this time he didn't look away. Now before you go anywhere I need 30 seconds of your time. And I need it right now while this story is still sitting in your chest. This channel runs entirely on the people who choose to stay. The algorithm will not bring you back here automatically. It is not designed to be loyal. But your subscription is. That one click on the subscribe button is the only guaranteed way to make sure the next story, which I promise you is already coming and is already worth your time, actually finds you. So do it now. Hit subscribe. Turn on the notification bell, so YouTube sends you a direct alert when we post. And then drop a comment below, and tell me the moment that got you. Was it the scorched rice? Was it Grandma Ruth's voice? Was it the discovery that they were both running operations in the same kitchen at the same time without knowing it? Tell me. I read every single comment, and your answer might shape what we build next. I will see you in the next story.